I never asked to share a room with anyone again after I turned 20. It felt like a regression, like being pulled back into childhood when I was just beginning to carve out a quiet, solitary space for myself in adulthood. But life doesn't always wait for your approval before reshaping itself. When my dad married Marlene, I tried to be open-minded. She seemed kind, even if a little too delicate, like someone raised to avoid the sharp edges of the world. What I didn't expect was her son, Liam, 17, quiet, with the kind of guarded eyes that told you he'd learned not to expect much from others. They moved in during the last days of summer, when the days stretched lazily into gold. Our house wasn't big, and with the renovation stalled, there was only one spare room. Dad made it sound like a temporary solution. "Just until the new partition walls go up," he'd said, eyes darting away from mine. But days turned to weeks, and weeks began to bleed into months. And still, Liam and I shared the same room. It wasn't a huge space, a converted attic room with slanted ceilings and a single window that looked out over the back garden. 2 twin beds were set up against opposite walls. I made it a point at first to pretend he wasn't there. Headphones in, eyes on my laptop back turned. He seemed just as eager to avoid me. We moved like shadows around each other, silent and tense, both too polite or too proud to break the ice. He smelled faintly of cedarwood shampoo. I noticed it one night when he returned from the shower and passed behind me on his way to his bed. That detail, of all things, stuck with me, because I realized it was the first real thing I knew about him. Not his favorite food or his favorite subject at school. Just his scent, a detail too intimate for strangers. Weeks passed. Then one night, everything shifted. It started with a book. I had left it out on my bed, an old, dog-eared novel I'd been rereading. Liam had already curled up on his side of the room, and I was brushing my teeth when I saw him holding it, the cover tilted in the soft lamp glow. "You like The Shadow of the Wind?" he asked, his voice low, uncertain. I froze with my toothbrush halfway to my mouth. I hadn't heard him speak more than a full sentence since he moved in. "I've read it 4 times," I mumbled through toothpaste foam. He nodded and gently laid the book back on my bed. "It's my favorite. I borrowed it from the school library last year." After that, the silence changed. It wasn't brittle anymore. It became something pliable, like warm clay waiting for shape. The next night, I brought out a different novel and read a few pages aloud, half joking, unsure if he'd find it silly. But he didn't. He just lay back against his pillow and listened. And so it began. Night after night, we read. Sometimes I read aloud. Sometimes he did. At first, it was just the story. Words, characters, chapters. But gradually it became more. We paused to talk, to dissect the characters' motives, to debate endings. He was sharp, insightful, and often caught things I missed. I looked forward to it, that quiet hour or two before sleep when we weren't step-siblings trying to coexist, but 2 souls caught in the same world of ink and imagination. The distance between our beds began to feel smaller. One night, during a particularly stormy evening, the power flickered and died. I lit a candle on my side table, and Liam crossed the room to sit closer. We read by candlelight, the air between us humming with something I couldn't name. Sometimes, I would catch myself glancing at him too long, at the way the light brushed the curve of his cheekbone, at the way his lashes flickered when he read aloud. It made my heart beat in strange ways, and sometimes I caught him doing the same. But we never spoke of it, not of the glances, not of the way our knees brushed once under the table and neither of us moved, not of the warmth I felt when he laughed at something I said, like I was the only person in his world who mattered in that moment. Maybe I should have been more careful. Maybe I should have said something the first time I found myself rereading a paragraph, not because I hadn't understood it, but because I'd been listening to his breathing. But I didn't. And now, I think part of me didn't want to. That night, As the storm raged on and the candle flickered low, Liam turned to me after I closed the book. "Do you think people can belong to more than one kind of story?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, then nodded. "I think sometimes the stories we belong to aren't the ones we expect." He looked at me for a long time, and then we turned off the light. But neither of us slept. It's strange how quickly the mind adjusts to new rituals. We were still sharing that small room under the slanted ceiling, still reading together at night, still pretending that this quiet closeness wasn't changing us. But it was, in the way I arranged my books so that he'd be curious enough to ask about them, in the way he always waited for me to finish brushing my hair before flipping open the next chapter, as if he'd learned to time his world with mine. Liam had started taking off his headphones when I entered the room. That was new. Before, he'd retreat into his music the moment we were in the same space, using it as a shield, an invisible wall. But now, he paused whatever he was listening to. His hands would hover over his phone, waiting to see what I was doing, if I was in the mood to read, or talk, or just sit in silence with the window open, letting in the cool breath of evening air. It was around that time we discovered poetry. It happened by accident. One of my lit professors had assigned a collection, and I was flipping through it at my desk, half thinking aloud as I muttered about how little I understood it. Liam had looked up from his bed. "Want me to try?" he asked. He sat cross-legged, that same guarded look softened by curiosity. His voice was quieter than usual as he read the first few lines, but something in the way he spoke, slower, more deliberate, made me shiver. "It's like he's whispering to someone who left him," I said when he paused. Liam tilted his head. "Or someone who's still there but slipping away." I didn't answer. The silence that followed was heavy, not with discomfort, but with something quieter and closer. I think we both felt it, how the words had opened something we couldn't quite close. That night, he asked if we could switch sides of the room. "There's a draft by my bed," he said, which was true, but not the whole reason. I said yes. We traded places, and the distance between us was just a little less now. I started noticing things, tiny details that shouldn't have mattered, like how his socks never matched, or how he always tapped his pen twice before starting his homework. He had a nervous habit of touching the bridge of his nose when thinking, and he never ate the last bite of anything, like leaving a piece behind made him feel more in control. And he noticed things too. He mentioned how I always curled my toes under when I read, how I hummed softly when I was focused, how I had 3 different smiles and only used the third one, soft, unsure, almost shy, when I looked at him. It was unsettling and beautiful, that level of being seen. One night, after a particularly long day, I was too tired to read aloud. I curled up in bed, my arms wrapped around a pillow, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark except for the glow from his lamp. "I can read tonight," Liam offered. I didn't say anything, just nodded. He opened the book and started, but after a few pages, he stopped. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what you said, about belonging to stories we don't expect." I turned my head to look at him. His face was half-shadowed, his eyes trained on the page, but I could tell he wasn't reading. "I think maybe people end up in stories they didn't choose, and then they have to decide whether to stay in them or walk away." My throat tightened. "Do you want to walk away?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, then closed the book softly. "No," he said, and that one word filled the room more than any of the stories we had read before. We didn't talk for the rest of the night, but something had changed. A current had turned, slow and invisible, tugging us somewhere deeper. Later that week, I caught him sketching in a notebook I didn't know he kept. When I asked to see it, he hesitated before flipping it around. Inside were drawings, doodles at first, but more recently detailed sketches. Of buildings, trees, abstract shapes, and one, unmistakably of me. I blinked, then looked up at him. He was staring at the floor. I didn't mean to. It started as practice. I didn't think I'd. It's beautiful, I said softly. That was the first time he blushed in front of me. From then on, we didn't just read novels. We shared the stories we were writing ourselves, him in sketches and quiet observations, me in scribbled paragraphs and unfinished poems. There were nights when we didn't even open a book. We just lay there, parallel on our beds, talking in low voices about things we were afraid to say out loud to anyone else. Fears, dreams, regrets. His voice would get softer as the hour grew late. Sometimes he'd turn toward the wall to speak. Other times, he'd glance over at me, holding my gaze too long. We never crossed any lines, but every night, the lines between us blurred a little more, and I began to wonder if it was even possible to go back to what we were before. There are moments in life when the world slows down, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in a quiet flicker of awareness. A glance held too long. A breath caught between two people who aren't supposed to feel what they're feeling. That's how it started to feel with Liam. Like time didn't know what to do with us anymore. It began one morning. I had woken before him, the gray light of dawn casting pale shapes across the ceiling. I turned slightly, trying not to wake him, only to freeze at the sight of a single violet resting on my nightstand. Fresh, delicate, its petals still cool from the morning air. And beneath it, a tiny slip of folded paper with one sentence scribbled in that messy, familiar handwriting. You always make books feel like spring. I didn't know what to do with that, so I tucked it into the back of my journal and didn't mention it. But that night, as I sat brushing my hair, Liam hovered by the window, pretending to fiddle with the curtain. You looked happy this morning, he said, his voice casual but weighted. Did you like the flower? I met his eyes in the reflection of the mirror. It was thoughtful. He stepped closer, his fingers grazing the wooden frame of my bed as if unsure whether to move forward. Then, without warning, he leaned down and wrapped his arms around me from behind. It wasn't a brief embrace. It was warm, close, quiet. His scent, that same cedarwood cologne, wrapped around me like a blanket I hadn't known I missed. I froze, but only for a second, because as strange as it was, as complicated as it felt, something in his touch made the room disappear. My breath hitched. I didn't pull away. When he finally let go, he whispered, "Sorry. I just needed to, but I wasn't sorry. That's what scared me. I didn't know how to file the moment. Was it brotherly affection? Was it something else? And why did it leave me feeling so warm, so seen?" That evening, something shifted again. Liam had been quiet all day, but when I came upstairs, he was already in the room, pacing. 2 mugs of cocoa sat on the desk. A stack of books was beside them, but one had been set apart, its title embossed in deep red, Forbidden Love. My eyes lingered on it. "I thought we could read this one tonight," he said. He didn't look at me right away, just gestured to the beds. "Also, I was thinking, the space would feel less cramped if we moved them closer. Side by side, like a reading nook. What do you think?" I nodded, unsure whether I was agreeing out of curiosity or some deeper pull I didn't want to name. We moved the beds. Together. Our hands brushed more than once during the process. We didn't talk about it, but when we finished, there was no longer a line between our sleeping spaces. Just a narrow fold where 2 twin mattresses met like puzzle pieces that had waited too long to click. He sat down and opened the book. The story was intense. A pair of lovers from feuding families. A bond forged in secrecy and unspoken glances. The parallels didn't escape me. And every few paragraphs, Liam would pause, not because he lost his place, but because he was watching me instead of the page. I felt it in the air, in the way his voice slowed, softened, almost searching. And then it happened. Halfway through a chapter, without saying a word, he reached over and laid his hand gently on mine. I didn't move. Couldn't move. My heart was a drumbeat in my throat. His skin was warm against mine, his thumb brushing the top of my hand once, just once, and my mouth went dry. Not from fear, not even from confusion, but from the weight of something real, something raw and alive and new. We didn't speak. The room held its breath. The book rested in his lap, the words forgotten. And still I didn't pull away. The night had settled around us like a secret. Outside the window, the world was quiet, just the rustle of wind through trees and the occasional creak of the house settling. Inside, the only light came from the little lamp beside Liam's bed, casting a golden pool across the pages of forbidden love. But he wasn't really reading anymore. His voice had dropped to a whisper. Not from sleepiness, not from fatigue, but something else. Something more intimate. The way his words touched the air made my skin ripple with goosebumps. Each line felt like it was written just for us, even though I knew better. I was lying on my side, half facing him, my hand tucked under my cheek. Somewhere between listening and drifting, my limbs had gone soft, my eyes heavy. His voice, gentle, slow, like silk being pulled through the air, felt less like narration and more like a lullaby. My breathing slowed to match his cadence. I could have stayed like that forever. Then, without warning, he stopped. The sudden quiet made me blink. When I opened my eyes, he wasn't looking at the book. He was looking at me. And then I felt it. His fingers, slowly brushing my hair back from my face. Delicate, thoughtful, as if afraid the moment would break if he touched it too quickly. I didn't flinch, didn't move. He continued, gently stroking his hand through my hair, then trailing down to the nape of my neck in soft, deliberate patterns. I melted under his touch, the tension I hadn't realized I was holding slowly draining from my shoulders. "You always look so peaceful when you listen," he murmured. His voice was close now, no longer reading but just speaking. To me. Like I was the only thing in the room worth speaking to. "I think you make everything feel calmer," he said. "Like just by being here, you make the air softer somehow." I swallowed, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't speak even if I wanted to. His fingers moved to massage the base of my skull, slow circles that sent tingles down my spine. "You're so smart," he added, barely above a whisper. "And so kind. And when you read, it's like you open little doors in the world that only you can see." My breath caught. He kept going. "I used to think I didn't belong anywhere," he admitted, his voice warm against my ear. "But this room, reading with you, it's the first place I felt safe in a long time." His hands moved from my hair to the curve of my shoulder, resting there lightly as if anchoring himself. Not to wake me, not to move me, but just to stay connected. His words wrapped around me more warmly than the blankets ever could. "You always smell like paper and vanilla," he said with a little laugh. "Like your stories have become part of you." A small smile curled on my lips. I wasn't sure if he could see it, but he must have felt the shift because his hand stilled. "Is this okay?" he asked softly. I opened my eyes just enough to find his dark, searching, filled with a kind of sincerity I hadn't seen in anyone else. "Yes," I whispered. And it was. In that moment, it was okay. Even if the world outside wouldn't understand it. Even if neither of us could fully explain it. His hand slid back into my hair, stroking gently, lulling me back into that sleepy, safe place. My heart beat softly, not with fear, but with something I couldn't name. Something beautiful and unspoken, like the pages we read but never said aloud. That night, sleep came slowly. But when it did, I dreamt of stories where love didn't have rules, where comfort could be a hand in your hair, and safety could be found in the sound of a voice you'd known only a few months, but trusted like you'd known it all your life. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was light. Soft, filtered gold slipping through the attic window, spilling in quiet pools across the floor and onto the edge of Liam's blanket. The room smelled faintly of books and worn cotton, and something warmer, familiar, like skin warmed by sleep. For a moment, I forgot where I was, forgot the rules that had quietly whispered in my ears all these weeks, forgot about the word half in front of brother, forgot everything except for the stillness of the morning, the warmth of another person just inches away. I shifted slightly and felt it, the weight of his arm, still resting lightly around my waist. He must have moved closer during the night. Or maybe I had. I didn't move, not right away. I wasn't ready to. His breathing was slow and even, and I didn't want to wake him. But before I could turn away or pull back, I felt it. A small, quiet kiss. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't eager. It was careful, soft and lingering, pressed gently to the top of my shoulder, right where the collar of my sleep shirt had slipped slightly to the side. His lips barely touched my skin, but it sent a warmth through me so unexpected that I forgot how to breathe. And then another, this one, near the curve of my neck. And then I felt him shift beside me. I thought maybe he'd realize what he was doing, maybe he'd stop, pull away, say it was sleep confusion or some dream bleeding into real life. But he didn't move far. He just whispered, "You're awake." I couldn't answer at first. My body was still caught somewhere between the dream and the truth. But when I turned slightly to face him, his eyes were already open, watching me. His expression was careful, searching, like he was waiting for me to tell him what this moment was. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said, his voice hushed with sleep. "I just didn't want to pretend anymore." I blinked at him. Pretend. He nodded. That this isn't something. That these